You weren't betrayed because he changed. You were betrayed because he no longer needed to pretend. Friedrich Nietzsche once said, "What is done out of love always takes place beyond good and evil." We tell ourselves betrayal happens because someone lost their way, but what if they simply arrived at who they truly were? Trust is comforting, but comfort has never been a guarantee. It's a mask we give others, hoping they'll wear it forever, even when it no longer fits. This is not a story about villains, it's a story about leverage, about what happens when balance shifts and someone realizes they don't need you anymore. Have you ever wondered why the people who build everything with you are often the ones who tear it down first? Why the friend who cheered the loudest at your beginning is the one who quietly exits before your peak? You don't want to ask these questions, because asking means admitting that loyalty might not be as real as you hope. You remember the early days, those messy desks, the shared caffeine-fueled nights, the way you looked at each other not just as teammates but as survivors of the same storm. There was an unspoken oath written in the sacrifices you made together. We get there, or we don't go at all. But over time, something shifts. The laughter gets shorter. The planning sessions start without you. You tell yourself it's stress, just business, a phase. You dismiss the tension in his voice when you challenge him. You ignore the way he hesitates before calling it our company, because you need him to still be on your side. You don't want to believe that the person who once helped carry your burdens could now be calculating how to leave you behind. So you convince yourself that loyalty is stronger than ambition, that friendship can survive proximity to power, that history protects you. But deep down, you feel it, the unease that grows when your presence becomes optional, when your value becomes negotiable, and by the time you admit it out loud, it's too late. He's already made the move, signed the deal, rewritten the story with you as a footnote. You say it came out of nowhere, but you knew. You just hoped your silence would be safer than your suspicion, that trust would prevent betrayal. But trust isn't armor, it's an offering. And not everyone treats it with care. The truth is brutal, he didn't change. You just mistook shared struggle for shared intention. And what breaks your heart isn't the betrayal itself, it's realizing you were always the only one fighting for both of you. You told yourself the betrayal happened because something went wrong, a misunderstanding, a misalignment. Maybe he felt unappreciated, maybe you were too controlling. You rewind every conversation, every hesitation in his voice, looking for a crack in the foundation you both built. But here's the truth you don't want to face. Betrayal doesn't need a reason, it only needs opportunity. Nietzsche warned us, human relationships are rarely built on truth. They're built on masks, and behind every mask is a will to power. That's the part we ignore. In the early days, your ally needed you. Your strengths complemented his, your resources overlapped, your risks were shared. But as soon as your success created asymmetry, one of you became more visible, more central, more irreplaceable, the equation changed. Suddenly, partnership felt like submission. Collaboration felt like a ceiling. He began to see you not as a comrade, but as an obstacle, and yet he smiled, still showed up, still said we. That's the part that hurts the most. The betrayal didn't come from distance, it came from proximity, laced with hidden resentment. You sensed it, but you couldn't name it. So you kept moving forward, dragging the weight of a relationship that had already ended in his mind, because you needed to believe that shared vision was stronger than silent envy. But Nietzsche knew better. There are no moral phenomena, he said, only moral interpretations. Your mistake wasn't trusting too much. It was thinking your loyalty had moral weight in a world driven by quiet self-interest. You weren't betrayed by a villain. You were replaced by a version of him that no longer needed you to grow. But maybe the deepest lie, the one that leaves the most lasting scar, is the belief that you and your ally wanted the same thing, that your goals, your morals, your vision were aligned. You remember the way you'd finish each other's sentences, nod through late-night calls, laugh over how no one else got it. You told people you'd never met someone who thought so much like you. But that's the thing about projection. It feels like connection until it shatters. He didn't think like you. He mirrored what you wanted to see. And you did the same. You called it synergy. But really, it was convenience dressed as compatibility. And as the stakes grew higher, the differences you never acknowledged began to take form. He wanted speed. You wanted stability. He craved recognition. You sought meaning. But by the time you noticed, it was too late. Your loyalty wasn't just to a person, it was to an illusion of who you thought he was, and walking away from him meant walking away from the version of yourself that needed him to be real. That's why it hurt. Not because of what he did, but because of what it forced you to see. You weren't on the same path. You were just walking close enough to believe you were. Nietzsche called this the cruelty of clarity. The moment when truth doesn't free you, it breaks you. Because the betrayal didn't destroy your trust in him, it destroyed your trust in your own judgment. And while you were building together, celebrating small wins, reassuring each other during setbacks, something invisible was growing between you. Not resentment, not yet. Something softer, more socially acceptable. Comparison. At first, it looked harmless. Who got more praise? Who was quoted in the press release? Who seemed to speak more in meetings? You both laughed it off, said it didn't matter, but deep down, it did. Because we measure our worth through proximity. Who's slightly ahead, who's slightly behind, and every inch of progress you made started to cast a shadow over him, whether you meant it to or not. The irony is, you weren't trying to win. You thought you were winning together. But Nietzsche warned that even the appearance of inequality breeds resentment in the hearts of those who feel displaced. Not because they hate you, but because your success reminds them of their limits. You tried to downplay your growth, tried to credit him, tried to stay small to keep the peace. But that's the tragedy. You can't shrink yourself enough to fit someone else's comfort without slowly erasing who you are. And he didn't want you to shrink, not openly. He just wanted not to feel small next to you. And so, without words, a silent game began. Who leads? Who follows? Who's seen? Who's tolerated? And eventually one of you decides they're done pretending it's equal. You thought you were sharing a ladder. He thought he was being left behind. You weren't partners, you were rivals who hadn't started fighting yet. But maybe what truly poisons the bond isn't envy or ambition, it's gratitude. That strange, heavy feeling of owing someone something you can't quite repay. You helped him when no one else would. You opened the door, gave him your time, your trust, your name. And in the beginning, he was thankful, truly. You saw it in how hard he worked, how fiercely he defended your shared vision. But over time, that gratitude began to mutate. It turned into pressure, into weight. Every compliment he gave you was laced with a hesitation. Every success you celebrated together carried an invisible cost. Because the longer he felt like he owed you something, the more he resented the feeling. He didn't want to be the one who was helped. He wanted to be your equal. But your past kindness became a ceiling he couldn't break through without breaking away from you entirely. That's the paradox. The more you gave, the more he felt small beside you. You thought you were empowering him. He felt like you were defining him. And eventually, he stopped seeing your support as generous and started seeing it as control. Nietzsche once wrote that the one who receives too much begins to hate the giver, not for what was done, but for what it implies. You didn't ask for repayment. You didn't hold it over him, but he held it over himself. And when that burden became unbearable, he looked for a way out, not to escape you, but to escape who he became next to you. He didn't betray you because he forgot what you did. He betrayed you because he couldn't stand remembering. And maybe the betrayal didn't begin with emotion at all. Maybe it started quietly, inside the structure itself. The way power and resources flowed, the way decisions were made, the way credit was distributed. In the early stages of cooperation, everything feels mutual because there's little to divide. But as things grow, attention, money, recognition, those flows begin to harden. Patterns emerge. One of you becomes the face, the other becomes the support. One makes calls, the other takes them. It's not immediate. It builds in layers, in who sits closer to the investor, who gets introduced first, Who is described in the media as the visionary while the other becomes the operational mind? You may not have noticed it at first, or you did and told yourself it didn't matter. But for him, every small imbalance became a quiet insult. Every time your opinion carried more weight in a meeting, it chipped away at his sense of agency. And when power concentrates, even unintentionally, it breeds discomfort. Not because he wanted to control you, but because he started to feel invisible beside you. That's how betrayal begins, not with hatred, but with erosion. With months, even years of feeling like the partnership he's in no longer reflects who he believes himself to be, he starts to think, why am I still here? What would this look like if I stepped out of the shadow? Not all betrayal comes from malice. Some comes from a deep hunger to rebalance a system that has quietly left you behind. Nietzsche understood this well. He said every structure carries the seed of its own rebellion. Because once power tilts, the question is never if someone will act out, but when. And by the time you notice the imbalance, he's already made peace with breaking it. You didn't lose him to resentment, you lost him to gravity. You saw the signs. You felt the distance, the strange pauses in conversation, the sudden defensiveness, the way decisions started happening without you in the room. And yet, you said nothing. Not because you didn't notice, but because you couldn't afford to. You told yourself it was just a phase, that he was stressed, that you should give him space. But beneath all those rationalizations was a quieter, more uncomfortable truth. You needed him, not just for the business, or the project, or the future. You needed him to still be who he was at the beginning, your ally, your partner, your proof that this whole thing wasn't just yours to carry. So you ignored the unease. You shrunk your instincts. You silenced the part of you that wanted to ask hard questions, because asking meant risking the one thing you were clinging to, the idea that you weren't alone in this, and in that silence something twisted. You thought your stillness was loyalty, but it wasn't. It was fear. Fear of losing him. Fear of confirming what you already suspected. Nietzsche warned that we often confuse love with dependency, that what we call trust is sometimes just the terror of abandonment in disguise. And that's what kept you quiet. Not faith, not clarity, just the desperate hope that silence might preserve what honesty would destroy. You weren't protecting him. You were protecting the version of you that didn't have to face the truth. You kept asking yourself when it started. When did he begin to drift? When did his voice change? When did the warmth turn cold? But maybe that's the wrong question. Maybe it didn't start. Maybe it was always there, hidden, contained, waiting. We like to believe that betrayal happens when someone turns into a different person, that something infected them, corrupted them, made them lose their way. But what if he didn't lose anything? What if he just finally stepped into who he really was? The moments you now call red flags weren't anomalies. They were glimpses, hints, quiet warnings buried under charm, under loyalty, under shared victories. But you looked away, not because you didn't see, but because you didn't want to see. You needed the story to stay clean. You needed him to be who he promised, not just for him, but for your own sense of judgment. And so he waited, patiently, until the dynamic shifted, until he no longer had to appease, until he had leverage, until his name could stand without yours. That's when he moved. Not out of spite, but because now he could. And in that moment, you realized it wasn't betrayal, it was unveiling. Nietzsche reminds us that power doesn't corrupt, it reveals. And what you called change was just the mask finally slipping. Not because it cracked, but because he no longer needed it. He didn't betray you out of weakness. He waited until he was strong enough to walk away. And maybe the most disturbing truth is this: he didn't betray you in spite of the system. He betrayed you because the system rewarded him for doing it. Look around. The culture doesn't punish disloyalty. It rationalizes it, rebrands it, applauds it. When a founder is ousted by his co-founder just before IPO, the headlines don't say betrayal. They say strategic pivot. When a rising executive takes credit for a project built by others, the company doesn't intervene. It promotes Sinho because performance is valued more than principle, because in a results-obsessed world, loyalty is only sacred when it's useful. The books on success don't tell you how to build with others. They tell you how to outgrow them, how to negotiate harder, scale faster, lead alone. They tell you to level up, and if someone can't keep up, to leave them behind. Business schools preach collaboration but reward extraction. Startups are founded by friends and end with equity disputes. Artists form collectives until one of them gets famous and signs a solo deal. Even in politics, alliances dissolve the moment power shifts. This isn't accidental. It's structural, it's cultural, and it works because we've all agreed to the lie that betrayal is just evolution. Nietzsche wrote that morality is often the invention of the powerless used to bind the strong, and what we call disloyalty is often just a refusal to play weak. So when he walked away from you, when he sold the vision without your name on it, he didn't see himself as a traitor, he saw himself as a winner. Because this world doesn't ask, were you loyal? It asks, did you win? And if you did, no one questions how. He didn't betray you alone. He was just the one honest enough to do what everyone else was quietly prepared to. And maybe the real betrayal, the one that stings long after he's gone, wasn't his. It was yours. The betrayal of your own instincts, the quiet dismissal of every warning sign, the way you flinched when something didn't feel right, and then forced yourself to smile anyway. You didn't ask questions because you feared the answers. You didn't draw boundaries because you feared rejection. You told yourself that trust was the foundation of partnership. But really, trust was the excuse you used to avoid confrontation. You weren't deceived. You cooperated with the lie, because admitting that someone might hurt you means also admitting that they're not who you need them to be. And you needed him to be safe. You needed the narrative to hold. Because once that cracks, once doubt enters, it shatters everything you built together. So you kept the illusion intact, even when it began to rot. Nietzsche warned that the most dangerous untruths are not the lies others tell us, but the lies we tell ourselves to protect our comfort. Sometimes, he wrote, people don't want to hear the truth because they don't want their illusions destroyed. Kierkegaard went further. He said the self is not something you find, but something you choose to become. And every time you turned away from what you knew deep down, you chose the version of you that preferred hope over clarity. That wasn't trust. That was survival dressed as virtue. So when the betrayal came, it didn't fall from the sky. It had been walking beside you the whole time, calm, patient, tolerated. And now, in the silence that follows, the most brutal truth is this: he didn't lie to you. You made yourself blind. And if you dig even deeper, beyond the silence, beyond the self-deception, you might realize that the cracks didn't form from conflict, but from closeness. It wasn't the disagreements that ruined things, it was the intimacy. The way your minds began to sync, the way your voice became indistinguishable from his in meetings, the way he started using your language, finishing your sentences, thinking your thoughts. In the beginning, that felt like alignment, like strength. But over time, it blurred the boundary between identity and dependency. Freud believed that love and power are fundamentally incompatible, that to fully merge with another is to surrender the illusion of self-control. And in your partnership, the deeper the trust grew, the more invisible his autonomy became. Every decision you made together felt to him like a small submission. Every compromise, no matter how fair, felt like a loss. Because in love, we unconsciously recreate our earliest power struggles. We want to be chosen but not consumed. We want to be seen but not eclipsed. And in that tension, resentment blooms. He didn't hate you for being strong. He hated that your strength made him feel smaller. Not because you intended to dominate him, but because in his psyche, the more he aligned with you, the more he disappeared. Nietzsche warned us, when you look long into the abyss also looks into you. But he also warned of something subtler. When you mirror someone too completely, you risk awakening the part of them that wants to shatter the glass, because they can no longer tell where you end and they begin. So he pulled back, not to escape you, but to reassert himself. And by the time you noticed the distance, he had already decided intimacy was a trap. The more he loved you, the more he felt conquered by you. So he did what the world teaches men to do when affection threatens autonomy. He severed the tie. Not to hurt you, but to survive you. He didn't leave because he stopped caring, he left because he couldn't care without disappearing. But what if the betrayal wasn't just his? What if part of it was yours, hidden, unspoken, buried beneath your own idea of who you thought you were? Carl Jung believed that every person carries a shadow, the unconscious part of the psyche that contains everything we deny in ourselves. Rage, envy, ambition, cruelty, desire for control. And when we suppress it, it doesn't disappear. It moves, it projects, it finds a host. And often, that host is the person closest to us. The one we give power to, the one we call our partner. So while you were trying to be the stable one, the wise one, the moral one, he became the repository for everything you wouldn't admit you wanted: recognition, authority, dominance. And when he started reaching for those things, you didn't just feel threatened, you felt betrayed. Because on some level, he was acting out what your own shadow craved. That's the unbearable part, that the betrayal may not have come from outside you at all. Jung warned that what you resist not only persists, but grows in size. And when it grows large enough, it appears in the world as event, as pattern, as someone else's choice. But it's not theirs alone. It's yours too. You weren't just afraid of losing control. You were afraid of becoming the one who takes it. So instead, you stayed passive, performed loyalty, idealized humility, and condemned him when he stopped doing the same. Nietzsche once wrote that we often call others evil for doing openly what we secretly long to do. And in this case, your ally didn't just rebel against you. He embodied a part of you that you had long ago exiled. A hunger for power masked as fairness. A desire to lead camouflaged as cooperation. He didn't just break away. He became your mirror. You weren't betrayed by his darkness. You were betrayed by the part of you that gave it permission to act. So now ask yourself, really ask, without defense or narrative, if you were him, would you have stayed? If you saw the power tipping toward someone else, if you felt your voice softening while theirs grew louder, if every room began to treat them as the center and you as the echo, how long could you have endured it? If opportunity knocked and whispered, you could break free, you could be more, would you have looked away or would you have listened? Would you have convinced yourself that it wasn't betrayal, just evolution? That it wasn't disloyalty, just timing? This isn't about forgiving him. This is about understanding that betrayal doesn't come from monsters. It comes from people who feel cornered by their own fading relevance. And maybe you would have made the same choice, not because you're cold or cruel, but because you're human. Nietzsche reminds us that he who has a why to live can bear almost any how. But what happens when your why begins to belong to someone else? When your purpose becomes background noise in another person's ascent? Would you stay loyal to the mission or reclaim your identity, even if it meant breaking? These aren't easy questions, but they matter. Because until you're willing to see yourself in the one who left, you're still trapped in the story of the victim. Jung warned us that what we deny in others is often what we cannot forgive in ourselves. So ask yourself now, with brutal honesty, in his position, with his fears, with his hunger, what would you have done? Because maybe this was never a story about right and wrong. Maybe it was a story about roles, about who was given the script and who decided to rewrite it. And if the roles were reversed, maybe you wouldn't have stayed either. And now that we've stripped away the sentiment, the nostalgia, the moral outrage, what are we left with? A simple but unsettling truth. Cooperation is not a system of trust. It's a system of negotiation. What we call trust is often just a set of unspoken expectations, default rules we assume everyone's agreed to but no one signed. You think loyalty is sacred, but in reality it's conditional, held together by shared incentives, not shared hearts. Partnerships are not moral contracts, they are strategic alignments. They work until they don't, until power shifts, until value becomes uneven, until one person realizes they can win more by walking alone than by staying together. And when that moment comes, the language of trust collapses and the language of leverage takes its place. Nietzsche said it plainly, morality is just the herd's attempt to restrain the strong. which means the systems we build around loyalty and unity are often just strategies to keep power contained. When someone breaks that system, we don't just lose the relationship. We lose the illusion that cooperation was ever sacred, but it never was. Cooperation is a wager. If you keep your end, I'll keep mine. And the only way to survive that game is not by demanding trust, but by understanding stakes, power, and risk. So don't just ask, can I trust him? Ask, what happens if he stops needing me? Don't just hope for loyalty. Build structures where betrayal has a cost. Because at the end of the day, trust isn't a guarantee. It's just the silence between two people who haven't yet found a reason to walk away. So now you sit in the aftermath. No more justifications. No more maybe he'll come back. You've replayed every conversation, every glance, every hesitation. You've torn yourself open, trying to locate the moment everything cracked. But here's the truth no one wants to say. Maybe there was no crack. Maybe there was just a quiet recalculation. You didn't lose him because he stopped caring. You lost him because he stopped needing. Not all exits are personal. Sometimes they're practical, cold, efficient, strategic. That's what makes them so painful, because you kept looking for the emotional wound, the betrayal born of anger or resentment. But it wasn't that. It was a shift in value, in leverage, in use, in relevance, the same way companies lay off their most loyal employees, the same way lovers drift once the mirror no longer flatters, the same way power forgets those who helped it rise. Nietzsche never sugarcoated it. He who cannot abandon will eventually be abandoned. You thought what bound you together was unbreakable, but what bound you was usefulness, mutual benefit. And when that stopped, so did the alliance. He didn't betray you. There was no war, no declaration, just absence, just decision, just silence. So stop asking why he changed. Stop trying to prove your worth in hindsight. Look the truth in the face, because only then can you begin again, stronger, sharper, less naive. And that truth is this: you were not betrayed, you were just no longer useful.